May 1st, 2004. There are 2 minutes and 11 seconds left in Mike Powell's Dome career. Syracuse, currently on the man up, leads UMass 18-6. Mikey has 6 goals and an assist. It's the part of the game where fans spend more time deciding whether to leave early and beat the traffic or stick it out. This cake is baked. Not tonight. All season long, Mike Powell has promised something never seen on a lacrosse field before, what he calls the move. This game's commentators opened the broadcast talking about the move. There is nothing meaningful in play right now, but this crowd has never paid this much attention to Mikey Powell.
Powell has the ball. There's his forward flip and his shot. Oh, that was the move.
Some saw the move as unnecessary. Some saw it as arrogant. Plenty of people, including Mikey himself, would point out that, in the end, the shot didn't even make it to the goal. Do you think these fans care?
He didn't put it in the goal, but the fans loved it anyway. And no, I've never seen that on a lacrosse field before.
From the perspective of individual accomplishments, Mike Powell's career is unmatched across all of Syracuse history. Through the lens of team success, his era ranks behind only the Gate dynasty. Those who had worn 22 before him chose the grandest stages for their one iconic moment. But here is Mikey Powell, at the end of a blowout, getting a standing ovation from the fans for doing a front flip. Some will say that's as far from the essence of sports as it gets. Some will say nothing could be closer to it. Mikey Powell somehow feels accurate on both counts. May 29th, 1988. Mike Powell is 5 years old, digging up dirt by the backyard oak tree as any 5-year-old does. His older brothers, Casey and Ryan, play on the lacrosse field they had painted with flour when the neighbors Jason and Josh Kaufman show up. They are all talking about what Gary Gate did last night, and all they do for hours is try to replicate this air gate. Mikey's not old enough for his mom to let him play lacrosse with his brothers, but he always watches, and watching this speaks to something deep within him. There isn't a score, or a crowd, or even teams, just some kids in the yard trying to dunk the ball from behind the goal, not because it's efficient or effective, but because in a very literal sense, it's beautiful. There's innovation and self-expression and art to it. Before the sun goes down, but after the rest of the boys head inside, Mike Powell takes Ryan's stick and, with no one else watching, attempts an air gate of his own. He's 5. He doesn't come close at all. But this is the only lacrosse he has ever known. It's sometime in the spring of 1995. Casey, now a freshman at SU, has invited Mikey to come down to the hill for a night. Now 12, Mikey sits in the stands as his first Syracuse lacrosse practice begins. He watches Roy Simmons Jr. walk out of the tunnel, briefly speak to his team at midfield, go to the sidelines, and blow his whistle once. For the next 2 hours, Mikey watches the legendary 1995 Syracuse fast break run time after time. When it's over, Junior looks up to the bleachers and waves the youngest Powell down to the field. They talk for 10 minutes about lacrosse and about the team, but also about art and music. Simmons would never coach Mike Powell in an organized lacrosse game, but watching Mike, it seemed as though he had always played for Junior. The duo feel distinctly linked. Powell's immersion into Syracuse lacrosse came far earlier than his brothers or the Gates. Like Junior, it's something he was simply born into. Beyond that, no player saw the artistry in lacrosse as closely to Junior as Mikey did. No player matched Junior's passion for the arts outside the sport the way Mikey did. None of the thoroughbreds Junior coached ever ran as freely as Mikey did. February 28th, 1997. The Powells are driving up I-81 towards Carthage. Syracuse and Virginia had just scored 43 goals in 60 minutes. Casey had just tallied a Syracuse record 13 points, and Mike had just sat front row, right in front of the 50-yard line for all of it. He's still so charged up about what he saw, he's talking the car's ear off. He would later write that it was the first time he saw lacrosse as athletic entertainment. As a product of a completely unique environment, Mike Powell possesses a singular vision of lacrosse. But if you tried to boil it down to one concept, that's probably it. Athletic entertainment. That's why Mike did the move. Where multi-sport athletes usually gravitate towards other team sports, Mike followed Taekwondo and gymnastics and BMX, all sports which judge success in more abstract terms. Where others see open space, he sees a canvas. Where others feel the pressure of the moment, he embraces the weight of the spotlight. Strip away the crowd, strip away the points record he's chasing down, strip away the score and the team and the goalie, and Mike is that 5-year-old in the backyard again. This is the only lacrosse Mike Powell has ever known.
Second, Powell gets the goal. Yes.
Mike Powell looking to make something happen, beats his defender, beats the goal.
Out front, he scores. Mike Powell going to work. Nice pass out in front. Different. Here comes Powell going one-on-one. They clear out for him. He gets around the defense. Back hit, they score. Powell going to work and score again. Oh, Powell gets it opening behind the back shot. He scores. Spinning, shooting low and scoring. Powell scores. Mikey Powell.
It's Mike Powell's big day. He will score 179 points as a junior at Carthage, at the time third in New York State history, then follow it up by scoring 194 points as a senior for a then state record. He is the most renowned lacrosse recruit in the country. Casey and Ryan haven't put any pressure on Mike as he's toured schools and talked with coaches. Now, with the audience of his older brothers, he announces his decision. Mike Powell is going to Fairfield University, a program that has never made the NCAA tournament. Casey tells him Mike Powell is not going to Fairfield. Mike Powell is going to Syracuse. I'm sure it felt as though there never really was a choice for Mikey, and to that I'd say, grab a ticket and get in line, pal. On one hand, Mikey never got what even Junior received in his upbringing, a time and place to grow independent of Syracuse lacrosse. On the other, that incubation almost meant he couldn't play anywhere else. Mike Powell only knows Syracuse lacrosse. Around the third game of Mikey's career, offensive coordinator Kevin Donahue installed a red light, yellow light, green light system just for 22. Mikey never listened, he just kept getting the ball and trying to make things happen. Mike Powell has one speed, all gas, all the time. It's hard to argue with the results though. Mikey became the second Syracuse freshman with 70 points in a season, 4 behind John Zilberti in 1986. He became the first and only freshman in Syracuse history to be named a first-team All-American. He became the first and only freshman in the NCAA era to win the Turnbull as the nation's top attacker. Lacrosse? Meet Mike Powell. In 1999, 3 underclassmen were kicked off the team for a break-in at the team's practice facility, Manley Fieldhouse. 2 of them were Mike Springer and John Glatzel. Springer, a tall, slender, unassuming attackman, wouldn't have looked out of place in a computer science class. Put him by the crease though, and an effortless 100-mile-an-hour shot terrorized goalies, both in practice and in games. Debuting in 2000, Springer scored more points in his first year than Casey Powell, and while technically not a freshman record, his 48 goals remain the most by any Cuse player in their first season. Glatzel, a hard-nosed defenseman who found playing time in '98, went back home to Maryland and used the suspension as a wake-up call. He took a business internship, cut back on his drinking, got in the best shape of his life, and showed up on campus again in 2000 with a huge chip on his shoulder. Even after spraining his thumb in the second game of the year, Glatzel wore a brace for the rest of the season and put in a second-team All-American performance. Now the leader of the defensive unit after the graduation of Marshall Abrams, he was named a first-team All-American, as the Orange rolled back to a championship rematch against Princeton. Behind the reigning goalie of the year in Trevor Tierney, the Tigers' defense grinded SU to just 3 goals in the first half and 4 by the start of the fourth quarter, where the Orange found life on a 4-goal run. Princeton remained up 1 with 16 seconds left, and with Tierney and second-team All-American sophomore Damian Davis standing in his way, Powell, a true freshman, took the ball and sent the title game to overtime. He's never not been that dude. Syracuse never recorded a shot in the extra period though, and B.J. Prager clinched Princeton's 6th national championship. 2 years before Carmelo Anthony completed the greatest freshman campaign in Syracuse athletics history, Mike Powell brought Cuse a bounce away from the same feat. 2001 marked the foundation of the Tewaaraton Award, given to the outstanding college lacrosse player in the country, and often compared to college football's Heisman Trophy. Here too, Mikey fell short, failing to even receive a nomination. Whether it was the Tewaaraton snub or the title game loss, Powell came out of the gates even hotter in 2002, recording just the 4th 40-goal, 40-assist season in SU history, en route to another first-team All-American selection and another Turnbull Award. And with almost the entire core back, nothing prevented Syracuse from romping to another championship game. Mikey led the offense. Glatzel, the 3rd Syracuse defenseman to be named Defensive Player of the Year, captained the defense. There was a score to settle. The deciding act in a trilogy of Cuse-Princeton battles. Both programs tied with 6 NCAA titles. The Tigers had won 12 straight 1-goal games in the tournament, with their last loss in that category coming in 1991. For the 2nd straight title game, Powell and Davis duke it out. But unlike in 2001, Mikey dodges Davis into oblivion, slices apart Princeton's defensive scheme, and rifles home 4 goals to complete a 7-point night. He will be named the tournament's most outstanding player, and later receive the 2nd ever Tewaaraton. After just 2 seasons, Mikey was already a 2-time first-team All-American, 2-time Attacker of the Year, the best player in college, and a national champion. His 154 points as a Frosh stands alone, with no other Orange breaking the 130 mark. What's telling is that, unlike Casey and Ryan, Mike rarely appears on SU's single-game leaderboards. Rather, night after night, defender after defender took their very best shot at Mikey, and none ever won. He had put together a resume that stacks up with any 4-year career, and left the lacrosse universe wondering how much farther he could possibly go. He spent June defending the US national team in the World Championships as the team's second leading scorer. It seemed as though nothing could stop him. This is the moment everything very nearly fell apart. Behind the scenes, Mike inherited a different reputation from his older brothers, one of wild partying. Where on the field, no amount of pressure got to 22's head, Mikey struggled mightily with the weight of being a student athlete. He'd often make up for skipping classes by practicing more lacrosse. After all, how could he not feel invincible? In the fall of 2002, however, Mike opened a letter from the university, informing him his grades were so low he was being kicked out of school. Through a twist of fate, Mike's time in Australia delayed his reaction, and had he not been there, Mike Powell very likely would have transferred or turned professional. In the end, Mike took it as the wake-up call he needed, spent that semester maturing and rehabilitating his academic life at Onondaga Community College, and curbed his party habits. 22 wasn't going anywhere. Statistically, Mikey recorded the worst season of his Orange career in 2003. Because this is Mikey, that equates to 64 points, 4th in the nation per game, a 3rd first-team All-American nod, and a 3rd Turnbull Award. 22 carried the Orange to another Final Four, but with the team restructuring its help around him, a second quarter lead turned into an ugly blowout at the hands of Hopkins. Though being named a finalist, Powell also missed out on the Tewaaraton to eventual national champion Chris Rotelli. Mike Springer ended his college career with 229 points, which remains 10th in Syracuse history. With the exception of the Powells, he is the only 4-time All-American Orange attack of this era, and remains 3rd on SU's career goals list. Outside of Powell and first-teamer Sean Lindsay, only 3 other Orange players made an All-American team in 2004, 5 fewer than 02 and 7 fewer than 2000. Coming off a season facing defenses that dedicated a man to covering him at all times, one might think Mikey could see even more thrown his way. But switching his attack partners from off-ball finishers to on-ball dodgers proved to be the pressure release. One final act for Mikey. One final show for Powell. Mikey's 2004 campaign made him the first and only Syracuse player with multiple 40-goal, 40-assist seasons. He capped his Dome career with the move. Then, with just over 12 minutes left in Syracuse's regular season finale against Georgetown, Mikey relegated Casey and Ryan to 2nd place in SU career points. Cuse could only manage the 4th seed, but powered by 22, brushed aside Albany and snuck by Georgetown in a quarterfinal rematch. Late in the Final Four contest against Hopkins, Powell founded Syracuse's 300-point club, of which he remains the only member. It's all too fitting that the sport's brightest star would play his final career game on the grandest stage college lacrosse had ever seen to that point. May 31st, 2004. It's quiet on the Syracuse team bus. The Orange are heading to the national championship, played at the Baltimore Ravens M&T Bank Stadium for the 2nd consecutive year. As the bus makes its way down I-95, Mike Powell looks out at the warships docked at Fort McHenry. Across the harbor on Federal Hill, he sees a cannon monument and an American flag. The game is about to start. As the lower seed, Syracuse takes the field first, and Mikey turns around to watch his opponents make their entrance. The U.S. Naval Academy lacrosse team runs out of the tunnel, and a record crowd of nearly 45,000 roars in a way Mikey has never experienced. Make no mistake, he and Cuse are the evil empire today. This game featured 7 lead changes. The two sides ended the first quarter tied, went to the locker room at halftime tied, and no team ever led by more than 2 goals. Navy threw the kitchen sink at Mikey, but 22 kept creating and exploiting the smallest gaps in the defense to spring his teammates open. Navy opened the fourth quarter with 3 goals and tied the game at 12 with under 5 minutes to go. On SU's next possession, as Mikey turned near midfield and ran at his defender, the electricity in the stadium felt palpable. The midshipman sent 2 defenders towards Powell, who capitalized again for his 5th assist. Navy secured possession next and continued probing at SU's defense as the clock wound down. Practically the whole stadium could sense the Orange needed 1 more goal.
Looney backs in. All about a creative shot. Way too high for Bailey. It's a loose ball that reaches the midfield line. Syracuse trying to rake it free. The Orange will. Knee attacking. Powell scores! Oh, Mike Powell does it for Syracuse!
Navy would score 40 seconds later, leaving Mike Powell's final move for Syracuse Lacrosse, one that won his 2nd national championship. Growing up, there wasn't a whole lot Mikey could do on the field his family hadn't seen before, but Casey and Ryan can't say that. His 89-point 2004 campaign is tied for 4th best in SU history, and on his final go, Mikey swept the postseason awards, being named a first-team All-American, winning Attackman of the Year, Player of the Year, Most Outstanding Player of the tournament, and the 4th ever towards him. Mike Powell had overseen the most successful period in Syracuse lacrosse history, bar the Gate era. Statistically, he remains 2nd in tournament points as the only man in Gary Gates' universe. He is one of 7 men to be a first-team All-American 4 times. Of those 7, 2 were pre-NCAA, 1 was at Division III, and 1 was for a face-off specialist. That leaves Maryland's Frank Urso, our old buddy Del Dressel, and Mikey. Dressel and Urso combined for 382 career points. Mikey alone had 307. He's the only 4-time winner of the Turnbull Award, and the only man to outright win 2 Tewaaraton's. The year Mikey had started at Syracuse, a new professional field league, Major League Lacrosse, was founded. Suddenly, there was a path in field lacrosse after college, and Orange icons wasted no time making their mark. Gary and Paul Gate became the first truly full-time professional lacrosse players, earning enough through endorsements to further open doors for the sport, as always. Casey Powell is the only American to outright win an MVP award in both the box NLL and field MLL. Ryan became the first fully endorsed Nike lacrosse athlete. Casey outdid him by being on Lacrosse's video game series, not as a cover athlete, but as a Tiger Woods PGA Tour style figurehead. Mike Powell played exactly 31 games of professional lacrosse. There wasn't any kind of injury. There wasn't an off-field event. Mike was in his athletic prime and just walked away. (1998). It's a cold, winter night in Carthage. Mike Powell is supposed to be in bed by now, having already been chastised for being out late as many 16-year-olds are. But he's downstairs, right in front of his mother. With a humble softness, far from his on-field bravado, he strums the guitar he taught himself to play, and sings. Rings culture can feel like a plague on modern sports discourse. Nothing seems to matter anymore except which set of millionaires gets to hoist a shiny piece of metal that says, "We're the best." Winning has taken up so much space in our dialogue, there's no room left for nuance or subtlety. Just two mirrors, completely reflecting against one another. Lacrosse has never been like that. Simmons always said it. There are no seven-figure contracts waiting at the end of this tunnel. No fortunes to be made on these fields. No widespread fame or notoriety to be achieved here. It's always called to a certain sect of people for that exact reason. Mike entered the college lacrosse world at the same time as another inner circle legend, Princeton's Ryan Boyle. If you want to see what Mike's professional career could have been, look at Boyle's. Yet, Boyle and Powell could not have been more different. Boyle approached the game as a science, with an analytical mind that could dissect the sport at lightning speed and with ruthless, relentless efficiency. Mikey danced and dodged and went behind his back and did flips because that is lacrosse to him. It doesn't matter if it's alone in a Carthage backyard or at Lake Placid 3 feet behind Gary and Paul Gate on grass. It doesn't need football stadiums or tens of thousands of fans or corporate sponsorships or broadcast deals. Just love, passion, and the desire to go out and create something. That Mikey happened to reach a level of statistical greatness this program has never seen before or since was merely an unintentional side effect. Trying to paint his legacy with it, as so many do, is cutting grass with a machete. His play was so vivid and all-encompassing and beautiful, it drowned out everything else into white noise. We didn't watch him to see who would win or lose, or whether he'd hold up that hunk of wood and metal at the end of the year that validated our opinions on him, or to see what records he'd break. Rather, we all watched Mikey Powell for the pure, unadulterated joy of watching Mikey Powell. He made us all disciples, painted masterstrokes with every cradle, and blurred every aspect we traditionally associate with athletic greatness into meaninglessness. He transformed this sport into pure, unfiltered art. There is no higher honor to be achieved by an athlete. There was no need for him to stay in lacrosse. Growing up, he never dreamed of donning a professional jersey. Syracuse was the mountaintop, and in essentially every way, Mikey summited it. These days, Mike Powell regularly drives 10 minutes from his house to get coffee and chat with Simmons. They talk about music, sculpting, woodworking, practically everything but lacrosse. Mike, who runs an art studio by himself in Cazenovia, is constantly picking Junior's artistic brain. He writes songs and plays shows at local events, and spends his time creating. It's no different than what he did on the field. It is the only lacrosse he has ever known. While brief, Mike Powell's MLL career brought one more lacrosse dream into reality. Thanks to a trade with the Philadelphia Barrage, the Baltimore Bayhawks possessed the first pick in the 2004 MLL draft, allowing head coach Gary Gait to select Mikey. Powell wore the number 7, as 22 belonged to his new attack partner, Gary Gait. You'd be forgiven for thinking that at 38 years old, Gary was washed up. He won co-MVP with Mark Millen and scored 6 goals in the title game. In another world, where Mikey stays in the sport, this partnership is probably viewed as a passing of the torch. But to us, the 22 that started it all, and the purest expression of 22's essence playing together, highlights the period of lacrosse they had started and finished. Perhaps their brilliance had become so regular we took it for granted. Maybe, while it was all happening, we were so occupied with their magic we never stopped to truly take in the scale of what they had built. "22 consecutive Final Four appearances, 14 title games, 9 national championships. Someone born the day of the 1983 championship could have watched the 2004 title game with a beer in hand and never known another reality. Even in an American society undergoing continuous upheaval, Syracuse lacrosse was, in a niche way, the ultimate constant. Compared to the rest of the men's collegiate game, the streak might as well exist in deep space. Princeton, holder of 6 national titles, never strung together more than 3 consecutive trips. The mighty Hopkins barely got halfway, putting together 12 consecutive appearances. Across the entirety of organized NCAA team sports, men's and women's, there is just one other reign of this length. In 1982, 1 year before Cuse's run began, the NCAA officially established a collegiate tournament for women's soccer. North Carolina, the defending champions of the previous format, cruised to the first NCAA title and promptly won 17 of the next 21. At almost the exact same time, the two programs, connected by no other means, anchored themselves to championship weekend in a way never seen before or since. For those 22 years, no single number captured lacrosse the way 22 did. Over 22 years, SU went from Gate to Lockwood to Powell to Powell to Powell. Each one of those 5 were 4-time All-Americans. Being a 4-time All-American is a remarkably difficult thing to do. Only 46 men in the NCAA era had done it by 2005, 34 when you count just attackmen and middies. By points, 5 of the top 29, 4 of the top 7, and each of the top 3 careers of that nearly 34-year period happened consecutively at the same school with the same number. And when those stars, for the most part, went out to the professional world, they inspired the next generations of their respective cities the same way they inspired them in Syracuse. When Gary and Casey duked it out for Team USA in Canada, both wore 22 on the absolute highest stage. 22 was no longer just a ubiquitous number in Syracuse lacrosse. It was ubiquitous with lacrosse in general. Everyone wanted to be a 22. Everyone wanted a piece of what 22 stood for. The only truly iconic player in this program's history who didn't wear 22 is Jim Brown. But he's a special case, as his football exploits inspired the late Ernie Davis to follow in his path and become the first African American to win the Heisman. and he promptly inspired the late Floyd Little to come to Syracuse. All three men are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and they all wore Brown's old number. It's like Jim Brown is a 22 for two different Syracuse sports. Do you know what number he wore? Did I mention that the third man on that 2005 Bayhawks attack line was Tom Marichek, and that a rookie Mikey Powell won All-Star Game MVP, and that the attack line of Gate, Marichek, and Powell is potentially the single greatest attack line in lacrosse history? This party, unlike anything else in all of lacrosse, seemingly couldn't end. November 20th, 2004. It's the third round of the NCAA Women's Soccer Tournament. 16th seed Santa Clara, despite being outshot 19-4, has taken North Carolina to overtime. On a quick counterattack, forward Megan Kakadelis scores the game winner, snapping both UNC's 49-match unbeaten streak and their 22-year Final Four streak. Carolina very likely played the better game, but every streak fights a battle against time, and eventually, every streak loses. In 2005, the year 22 showed up everywhere else. Syracuse men's lacrosse did not field a 22. It's not as though they didn't have the guy. They had the guy. Mike Lavelle was meant to be a 22. He had the athletic prowess, having learned to play up out of necessity in the burgeoning but small Albany lacrosse scene before a 4-inch growth spurt made him an All-American who could have played collegiate hockey. He had the pedigree. His older brother Kevin would go on to be a 3-time All-American at UMass and tie the most goals ever in an MLL game. Lavelle wore 22 in his first scrimmage with the Orange in the fall, where he scored 4 goals. This was supposed to happen, but Mike turned it down. Looking at the broader context, I get it. Lavelle was never here to be a superstar. He was just a private, humble guy who loved playing lacrosse. That didn't make him any less of a leader when he needed to be one, but it was the polar opposite of the man he was succeeding. Mikey Powell and Mike Lavelle chose two very different paths to the same destination. As a freshman, Lavelle scored 41 points and was named an honorable mention All-American. He had 5 points in Cuse's first-round tournament contest with UMass, including a game-tying assist with 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter to cap off another Syracuse comeback. 22 or not, Lavelle was taking the reins of SU's offense. In overtime, after one Syracuse possession, Sean Morris scored his own rebound to win the game 16-15 and end SU's Final Four streak. During the entirety of Cuse's run, the style of play was centered around Simmons' run and gun. But this wasn't 1990 anymore. In large part because of the Gates and the Powells, lacrosse had exploded across the eastern part of America. Tactical changes and evolutions across the sport had made defenses smarter and more athletic. For years, it didn't matter. Syracuse was often so talented their best players came through anyways, and as the old saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. After their first pre-semi-final tournament loss since 1982, the Orange recovered to make it again in 2006, before being swept aside by eventual undefeated champions Virginia. Streak or no streak, maybe 2005 was the aberration. The winds of a changing sport certainly blew more now than they did in the 80s and 90s, but Syracuse would seemingly always remain. It was now too big to fail, too historic to fall into obscurity, too present within the fabric of lacrosse to ever be anything other than what so many had come to know it as. This was an empire, and empires never fall. Until they do. The defense, long overlooked and buoyed by strong goalkeeping, completely fell apart in 2007. and the offense never found the production to make that point moot the way it had in years prior. Lavelle led the team, but with the lowest point total of his career, and for just the second time since points were tracked as a statistic in 1967, no Syracuse player surpassed the 40 mark. As a result, for the first time since the 70s, Cuse limped to a losing record while watching the tournament from home. Fans and media alike called it perhaps the worst collective season in Syracuse sports history. Those aren't my words. They're taken verbatim from a 2008 Daily Orange article. Was this it? Was the last quarter century the aberration here? Did this program just happen to wander into the grandest stages and stories and only now return to what it always had been? Syracuse fans were far from alone in asking those questions. 2007 marked the beginning of the end of the American dream for many, as the economic recession and housing crash shook the foundations they had built their lives upon. People were left lost and wandering. Those who could see the signs but were powerless to stop it found themselves disenfranchised. The magic we had all taken as a given was gone. But no matter how much we may resent it at times, the immutable truth of our existence is that the sun will always rise in the morning. There will always be invaders at the gates, and just like the rest of America, Syracuse could do nothing more but pick up the pieces and go forward, once more, unto the breach. It's 1983. Before the national titles, before the 22s, before the legends. Travis Solomon and Tom Nims had spent the whole fall battling for the starting goalie spot, and Nims won out. But in the first game of the season, Nims dislocated his shoulder, Solomon went in the cage, and the rest was history as the Orange won the title. Despite losing his starting position, Nims never once sulked or complained. He'd take over the following 2 years and leave Syracuse second on the all-time saves leaderboard, where he still stands today. Nims followed a common path among Syracuse lacrosse alumni. He went back to Waterton and continued to spread the game. One fateful day, he brought 2 lacrosse sticks home. A red one for Greg Nierovsky, a neighborhood boy who affectionately dubbed Nims Uncle Tom, and a blue one for his son, Kenny Nims. He and Nierovsky lived a tale that we've seen plenty of times in this story. They frequently watched Cuse in the Dome. They grew up idolizing the nearby Powells, and they formed a feeder-finisher partnership that led them to glory in high school. Both were good enough for the next level, and the decision of where was nothing more than a formality. They weren't the only ones in the 2006 class who would prove heroes in this story. Dan Hardy was the gem of a stacked class, a 6'4" midfield behemoth and the number 2 overall recruit. In his first week of fall practice, he took his spot at his locker and looked up. Just below his name was the number he had asked to wear. 22 was what Hardy had dreamed of since he was a child. His father and brother had both won titles here. After a year without 22, Dan Hardy, along with Kenny, was tasked with carrying on the legacy. It wouldn't be anywhere near that simple. Defenses, focused on both his size and number, constantly put their long stick midfielders on Hardy, and the freshman struggled to adapt, only putting up 21 points and becoming the first 22 to ever miss out on an All-American selection. In the disastrous 2007 campaign, Hardy squeaked into an honorable mention spot, but fans chirped and derided him for failing to live up to the lofty standards set by his number. Hardy had a very respectable start to his college career, but when the expectations set for you are that? Coming off 2007, changes were in order, starting with a shuffling of the coaching staff. As part of a defensive retool, offensive coordinator Kevin Donahue shifted to that side to help new defensive coordinator Leland Rogers, and the old defensive coordinator was moved to the offense. Roy Simmons III wasn't quite the player his father or grandfather were, but as a coach, he'd been there every step of the way, from an assistant alongside Desko in 1983 to being hired as his defensive coordinator for a third stint in '99, to being tasked with retooling the offense and getting players like Lavelle and Nims to make a leap. That Thanksgiving, upon hearing Cuse wouldn't be ranked in the top 10 to open the year, Lavelle, now in his third year as a captain, held a meeting to fire the team up. Simmons crafted the nation's second highest scoring unit. Nims, a gifted passer that at times struggled to score, formed a potent two-man game with Lavelle, who exploded onto the scene with 64 regular season points. Even Hardy improved, though at a cost. Bone spurs had formed in his foot early in the season, and doctors said surgery to fix it would cost him the year. So, Hardy played on one foot, and mostly with the second midfield line. But while he struggled through the injury, everything all clicked together. He finally learned how to outsmart defenders, not just bully them. He too had broken through the glass ceiling, ironically because of a glass foot. On the other side, the turnaround wasn't as quick or as dramatic, but marshaled by 3 first-year players. 1996. John Galloway is 7 years old. His brother, 10 years older than him and a defenseman at West Genesee High School, has his buddies over playing in the backyard. John thinks they're the coolest people in the world, and he wants to do whatever it takes to hang out with them. Today, he's lucky. His parents are letting him go out there and play with the teenagers. But John isn't playing with them. He's in the net, taking shots from them. Lacrosse is probably the only major team sport where goalies wear less overall padding than outfield players. Considering at high levels, shots can top 100 miles an hour, it takes a very special breed to hop in the cage with nothing more than a helmet, a stick, and maybe a chest protector. Some, like Kenny Nims, can't stand it. Some, like John Galloway, can't get enough of it. 2004. For John Galloway, lacrosse isn't MLL games in football stadiums. It's not even Syracuse and the Dome. It's Mike Messer and West Genesee lacrosse. In middle school gym class, he would not step on the varsity field because he needed to earn that honor by making the varsity team. West Genesee holds lacrosse camps in the summers that are essentially practices. John is a freshman, but his parents can't take him today, and he can't find a ride. All Galloway can think about is what Messer would say to him if he missed even one practice. So, with gear in hand, Galloway walks 4 miles to the practice. He would have walked 4 miles back had Messer not picked him up along the way. John Galloway needed him to know he'd do whatever it took. It took time. Galloway didn't start until his junior year, but set the school's single-season saves record in 2006 and became the first goalie named the Central New York Player of the Year in 2007. He was quickly becoming a future star, with future being the key word there. There likely isn't a harder jump to the college level to make than at goalie. It's not just shot stopping, it's organizing a defense and executing on the clear. Even superstars can take a year or two to truly find their footing. In one of the first weight room tests of Galloway's career, the task was simple: bench press 185 pounds as many times as you could. John couldn't do it once. The starting defensive unit jokingly asked if this was the guy who was going to save them in the cage. Galloway took it personally. That winter break, while fighting tooth and nail for the starting job, John wrote a Christmas letter to the team. He needed them to know he would do whatever it took. Joel White scored 100 points his senior year at Cortland High School, being named a high school All-American. He spent the fall trying to establish himself in the offense, and went home for the winter knowing he'd spend the spring fighting for a spot on the second midfield line. One practice, Desko walks up to him, stick in hand. "Joel, what do you think of playing long stick midfielder?" White laughs it off. He's never been a defensive player. Later, Rogers asks him what he thinks he's doing. He could still fight against a loaded position group for limited playing time, or he could take the pole and start right out of the gate. Joel took him up on it and figured out LSM on the fly. Luckily, his new roommate at Cuse was always there for him. That fall and spring, White and Galloway talked through almost every practice back in their dorm, trying to carve out their own place on the team and on the hill. The night before the first game of 2008 against Villanova, Desko sat his 3 goalies down and informed them that while they would be splitting halves, Galloway would be the first true freshman goalie to start the season opener since Tom Nims way back in 1981. Where most young goalies struggled with the extra responsibility, Galloway's clearing game and organization skills, as could be expected from someone who idolized Masser's philosophies growing up, were polished and refined to the point where they could be considered strengths. Syracuse won 21-6, and Galloway showed enough in his half to earn the full-time job. Further up, White's fluid athleticism allowed him to excel with a pole. 10 years ago, he'd have been a two-way midi with a short stick, but this was the new way of lacrosse, with top athletes on both sides. White wasn't expected to lock up opposition middies, just use his quickness to stay in front of people, scoop ground balls in the middle of the field, and run in transition. He too figured it out on the fly, racking up 63 ground balls as a freshman, good for third on the team. As far as the third edition goes, let's meet Sid Smith. Smith hails from the only reservation in North America that has representatives from all 6 Haudenosaunee nations, aptly named Six Nations. Being in Canada, Smith was a box prodigy above all else, but after going through Onondaga Community College for a year in 2006, without losing a game, suited up for the Orange defense in his final 2 years of college eligibility. Thanks to the revitalized defense, Galloway's 150 saves, and an offense that scored 10 or more in all but 2 games, SU only dropped 2 contests in the regular season. A year after going 5-8, Hughes had rebounded to a 12-2 record and the 3rd overall seed in the tournament, sweeping by Canisius in the first round. By this point, it had been 4 years since Mike Powell tore up college lacrosse. The sport's attention was elsewhere now. Hopkins' Paul Rabel, a 3-time first-teamer and the reigning Midi of the Year, was capping one of the more dominant careers in college lacrosse history. Duke's Matt Danowski broke the all-time NCAA scoring record in the first round. 22 had been running off the bench all season, but it was now that all of Hardy's trials were paying off. Desko moved him back to the first line ahead of the tournament, and with defenses choosing to pull Steven Brooks, another injury-riddled yet uber-talented midi who had exploded to a first-team nod like Lavelle, Hardy finally channeled his inner 22. With 5 minutes left in the quarterfinal, he cut to his left and fired the winning goal, his 4th of the game, to send Cuse back to the Final Four, where another date with Dom Starja and Virginia awaited. Behind face-off dominance, the Orange should have controlled the first quarter, taking 14 shots to UVA's 4. Despite that, Virginia scored 3 and Syracuse just 2. Things unraveled further in the second half as cracks began to show in the inexperienced Cuse defense, and a 2-1 lead had turned into a 6-3 deficit at the break. At one point in the third, SU faced a 9-4 hole before Galloway found some confidence and Lavelle dusted first-team defenseman Ken Clausen. Virginia continued to hold serve in the fourth and nearly put it out of reach on the man-up, but the shot careened off the post, and Syracuse turned their possession into a man-up, with Lavelle capping a 2-goal swing with his third of the day. The teams continued to trade goals as the fourth wound down. Off a face-off, White was first to a loose ball and got clobbered, drawing a man-up that allowed Brendan Loftus to cut the lead to 1. After a Cavalier turnover, Loftus had his shot crash off the pipe, only for Lavelle to scoop it up and put it away with his trademark composure. Tie game. A Sid Smith caused turnover gave the Orange the chance to win it, but Hardy's shot was saved, and another Cuse-Virginia contest headed to an extra frame. Through the overtime period, neither goalie was willing to give in. After a face-off win, disaster struck when a turnover led to a UVA man-up opportunity in double OT. The chance was worked beautifully, with All-American Ben Rubior getting a wide-open look. Once again, it careened off the pipe. Syracuse wouldn't get another chance. Thanks to Lavelle, they wouldn't need one.
Lavelle backs in on Clausen. It's been a great matchup all day. Did he get free for a shot? Goes low! He scores! Mike Lavelle scores for Syracuse! And the Orange is off to the championship game!
Lavelle's 7th point propelled Cuse back to Memorial Day for the ultimate chance at redemption. Again, the NCAA attendance record was broken, with 48,970 fans packing into Gillette Stadium to watch the 5th championship game between Cuse and Hopkins. The Orange took a 6-5 lead into the break, where 25 years after the first episode in the magical rivalry, the 1983 champions reunited on the field. Every member, from far and wide, made the trip to Foxborough. Except one. November 16th, 1993. Tom Nims and his co-workers are loading a truck outside a Waterton factory. Nims goes inside to get something he had forgotten. His co-workers never see him again. Tom Nims passed away that day as the result of a blood clot. Upon hearing the news, Roy Simmons Jr. framed and gifted 2 of Nims' jerseys to the family, one for Nims' daughter Taylor, and one for Kenny. Kenny chose to put his jersey on the ceiling of his bedroom. He grew up under his father's number 10 and took it to campus with him. The 2007 season hit Kenny so hard, he swapped jerseys with Taylor in hopes it would change his fortunes. 25 years to the day after Tom Nims helped Syracuse win its first national title, Kenny Nims won its 10th, wearing his father's number 10. Galloway became the 5th true freshman goalie in NCAA history to lead his team to a national title. Lavelle finished his Syracuse career on top as a 4-time All-American, national champion, and the 2nd Syracuse player to ever win the Tewaaraton. No one on Syracuse's roster had more than 3 points in the title game. Just as the struggles and pain of 2007 was shared, the redemption of 2008 was shared. Before the game, written behind Syracuse's bench, were 5 numerals, familiar to anyone involved with the program since juniors' first days. 118-24. If they could, Nims, Desco, Lavelle, and company would stay in May 26, 2008 forever. But no matter how much we may want to push it off at times, the sun will always rise in the morning. Some, however, can only wait For many long Syracuse nights in the spring of 2009, Cody Jamieson bided his time with anticipation. Jamieson, like Smith, hailed from Six Nations, and, like Smith, played at Onondaga Community College in order to get his academics to a point where he was eligible to play for the Orange. Unlike Smith, who spent the lone season at OCC, it took the better part of 3 years for Jamieson to get there, and in that time, Cody had lit JUCO up. Having taken a year off in 2008, Jamieson enrolled in the fall and was allowed to practice with the team. All that was left to fully clear him was the transfer of his JUCO credits and a waiver clearance from the NCAA. For many nights, through the winter and into the spring, that call never came. At least to start, Syracuse would have to find a way without him. With the reigning Tewaaraton winner graduated, the primary offensive burden fell onto Nims, now fully the driver of the boat on offense and tasked with setting up the finishers. On the right, sophomore Stephen Keogh, a hockey enforcer who scored around the crease as well as he fought. On the left, Jamieson should have started, but in his absence, Cuse split time between Chris Daniello and Timmy Desco. Still, throughout the regular season, the Orange only scored 7 fewer goals than in 08, as Nims recorded 59 points, captaining an offense built more around its depth than any one player. And on the other end, with Smith, White, and Galloway continuing to acclimate, Syracuse jumped into the top 5 nationally in scoring defense. Despite a lackluster start, the Orange finished off their second consecutive 12-2 regular season, and immediately off the worst season in program history, Syracuse entered the postseason trying to go back-to-back. Repeating as champions would be an incredible accomplishment. It had only happened 6 times in the NCAA era at that point, and 5 of them came before the sports explosion. Since 1990, it had only happened once. Good news arrived on senior day, when at the last minute, Jamieson was finally cleared to play. The Orange defense took the mantle in the tournament, suffocating 3 successive opponents to a combined 17 goals. Coincidentally, exactly how many the Orange scored against Duke in the Final Four. Nims had 7 and 7 in the first 3 games. Jamieson had 6 and 2 coming off the bench. Repeating as champions was well and truly possible. When Ezra Cornell sought a suitable city to be the home of his new university, the final 2 choices were Ithaca and Syracuse. When Cornell snubbed Cuse and chose Ithaca, SU's most historic athletic rivalry commenced. Roy Simmons Sr., Jim Brown, and Roy Simmons Jr. all duked it out with the Big Red. Cornell was the only school that took down the gates in the postseason. For decades, as Cuse focused on Hopkins, Virginia, and Princeton, the spark faded. But in 2009, Cornell had dominated top-seeded Virginia to reach its first title game in 2 decades. For the first time, Cornell and Syracuse would play for the national championship. Led by first-team defender Matt Moyer, a midfield duo of Max Sebald and John Glynn, and 2013 Tewaaraton winner and top 5 scorer in NCAA history Rob Pennell, the Big Red presented a stern challenge. And for 56 grueling minutes, both defenses suffocated the game. Outside of Glynn, who had 5 points, no one found their rhythm. The Orange were only in the game because of their defense, but when Roy Lang burst by White and struck one in the top left to give the Big Red a 9-6 advantage with 5 to go, it seemed the opportunity was slipping away.
I'm not going to say that that's the game, but boy, that's
If you've paid attention, you can probably guess what this is leading to. Hardy draws a slide and finds a wide-open Keogh to cut the lead to 2. Josh Amadon assists Jamieson to suddenly make it a 1-goal game with 2.5 to go. Cornell takes the face-off, and with no shot clock, tries to run down the time. But Smith causes the turnover that gives Syracuse the ball with a chance to, improbably as always, tie it up. Nims had waited for this moment his entire life. He dodged from X, played a two-man game with Keogh, and missed a simple pass to the crease. Cornell would secure possession with just over 18 seconds left. All the Big Red had to do was keep the ball, and they would be champions for the first time since 1977. For all of the efforts, all of the growth, and all of the redemption, Syracuse, it seemed, would fall one goal shy of repeating. There just wasn't a way.
Could take all the time they want, cut this thing down to 7 seconds without even getting it in the box.
18 seconds to go up the near sideline. Morby whacked up by Nims. Ball's on the ground. Ball loose. Durkamp picked it up with 13. Ball's loose. Still loose. Keogh's got it with 10. Feeds ahead. Abbott. Here comes Abbott with 8. Abbott being hit in the side. Feeds the crease. Open Nims. Catches it.
He scores! He scores!
Ties it up with 4.5 seconds to go.
Woo! Listen to this.
Nims, having seemingly just committed the game-sealing turnover, relentlessly pressured Moyer into giving up the ball. Keogh, always a scrapper, dove on the ground ball and flung up a prayer to Matt Abbott, who threw his own Hail Mary pass with 3 defenders all over him. That one of those passes would be successful is far-fetched. That both found twine seems impossible. It was as if that ball had somehow been willed back into Kenny's stick. Cornell won the overtime faceoff, but Smith forced another turnover, and as the Orange worked it around, Pat Parrott found Dan Hardy with shooting space. The night of October 3rd, 2008, Dan Hardy went to a friend's apartment, had a few drinks, and tried to drive home. Police pulled him over. Hardy blew a blood alcohol content between 0.05 and 0.07%, below the legal limit for intoxication, but above the limit for impairment. Police eventually charged Hardy with driving while ability impaired. While waiting for the university to decide his case, Hardy gave up on the idea he'd get to play his senior season. He avoided campus and went home constantly. His grades plummeted as he just couldn't finish his assignments. He lost 15 pounds and dropped out of playing shape. Dan Hardy's life was falling apart. In the end, though, the school gave him a second chance. That he is here at all is remarkable, and right now he can put everything behind him. Dan Hardy has the fewest goals, assists, and points of any 22. He's been berated online and in person for failing to live up to the number his entire career. But right here and right now, he can score one of the most cathartic goals in Syracuse lacrosse history. Instead, he chooses to pass it on.
Not Emmett done. Top of the box, right side. Hardy faking, feeds the crease. Jameson
He
got it!
scores! He scores! Woo!
Cody Jameson delivers Syracuse an 11th national championship. The Masters of Memorial Day have done it again.
Syracuse, baby! National champ, they did it again! Are you kidding?
Jameson had waited for years to even get on the field for Syracuse. Open on the crease, he waited more and finally got his due. On this day, too, the glory is shared. All of Cuse's comeback goals came right on the crease off unselfish passing. None of it happens if Smith and the defense don't force every last one of their turnovers, if White doesn't snag every one of his 6 ground balls, and if Galloway doesn't make every last one of his 10 saves. Galloway remains the only starting goalie to ever win NCAA titles in his first 2 seasons. Nims left Syracuse as the tournament's most outstanding player, and in his final season of eligibility, Cody Jameson, a Mohawk from the Turtle Clan at the Six Nations of the Grand River, became the first Haudenosaunee player to ever wear 22 at Syracuse. The 2008 and 2009 teams are inextricably linked with the 1983 team, and not just through the Nims. They weren't the almighty conquerors of the era they bookended, but rather cheated destiny, dared to dream when no one else would, and descended into the kinds of legends that, simply put, have no business in our world. The heroes of the 2008 and 2009 teams had the lacrosse world thinking the rumors of this program's demise were greatly exaggerated. And as Galloway and White entered the second half of their Orange careers, the college lacrosse world once again seemed to be in SU's grasp. I wish I could tell you it stayed that way.